To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
For decades, investigators across 4 different states were searching for a violent offender they believed was responsible for a string of brutal assaults and murders. The crimes shared chilling similarities, but no suspect was ever identified. That changed years later when advances in DNA testing finally put a name to the violence. That name was Robert Eugene Brashers. And in recent years, his DNA would go on to reopen one of the most infamous unsolved murder cases in Texas history, the 1991 yogurt shop murders. This is Forensic Tales, episode 314, The Crimes of Robert Brashers. Not much is known about Robert Brashers' early life, and in many ways, that lack of information is part of what allowed him to go unnoticed for so long. He was kind of a nobody, just floating in the wind, bouncing around. He probably lived the kind of life you'd want to if you wanted to avoid going to prison for some of the country's worst crimes. But here's what we know about him. Robert was born on March 13, 1958 in Newport News, Virginia, a major city in the southeastern part of the state. He grew up one of 2 children born to Dulis and Nancy Brashers. And again, while a lot of the details about his childhood aren't known, records indicate that his family eventually relocated to Huntsville, Alabama, where Robert spent much of his youth. There's nothing to suggest that Robert drew any attention from law enforcement as a kid or teenager. According to court filings and later investigative reporting, he didn't have a juvenile court record. Whatever issues he had with the police came much later. He also reportedly didn't use alcohol or drugs during his teenage years, which is a little bit unusual. He didn't live the kind of childhood that many adult offenders do. We just don't see that with him. After graduating from high school, he enlisted in the military. Public records indicate that he served in the United States Army before later spending several years in the Navy. And although the exact timeline of his military service has never been fully clarified in open sources, there's no evidence suggesting he was discharged for disciplinary reasons or that he committed known crimes during that period. Once again, he just blended in with everyone else. By the early 1980s, he had left the military and began moving around a lot. He spent time living in Louisiana, including New Orleans, before relocating again, this time to Florida. By the mid-1980s, he had settled in Fort Myers. To those around him, Brashers didn't look dangerous or scary. He always kept a job, blended into his communities. He usually avoided drawing attention to himself. Later court documents would note that he was capable of forming relationships and functioning socially, traits that, in hindsight, made him even more difficult to identify as a serial offender. In 1991, he became a father. His daughter was born that year, the same period during which investigators in Texas were unknowingly collecting forensic evidence from a series of violent crimes that would one day be linked back to him. At the time, there was nothing in Robert Brashers' background that marked him as a suspect in any serious criminal investigation. No arrests, no public accusations, no known history of violence, and that is exactly what made him invisible. The first known violent crime linked to Robert Brashers didn't happen in Texas, and it didn't initially signal the pattern investigators would later uncover. On November 22, 1985, he was arrested in Port St. Lucie, Florida, following a brutal attack on a 24-year-old woman named Michelle Wilkerson. According to police reports, Brashers met Michelle earlier that evening in nearby Fort Pierce. The two spoke briefly, and he convinced her to go with him to a bar. Once there, they spent several hours drinking together. Later that night, he drove her away from the car, not toward her home, but to a dark, isolated alleyway near a citrus grove. Inside the car, Brashers attempted to make sexual advances toward Michelle, but she refused and tried to leave the truck. What followed can only be described as a violent struggle. During that altercation, Brashers pulled out a handgun and shot Michelle twice, once in the neck and once in the head. Despite her injuries, she remained awake, and she somehow managed to get out of the car and hide in a ditch beneath the road. She stayed there for a very long time as Brashers kept searching for her, so you can only imagine the terror she might have felt. Eventually, he gave up. He couldn't find her and left. According to police, he drove to a nearby beach and threw the gun in the ocean. If he was going to be connected to this crime, he didn't want them finding the weapon, so he did his best to get rid of it. But his attempt to get away from this failed almost immediately. His truck got stuck in the sand, forcing him to leave it behind and wander the beach on foot, looking for help. At the same exact time, Michelle Wilkerson had made her way to a nearby apartment complex. Residents helped her and contacted police, but before being transported to Lawnwood Hospital, she provided police with a detailed description of her attacker, including his appearance, his vehicle, and the events of the night, despite being shot twice. Hiding in a ditch for what must have felt like hours, she was able to remember almost everything. Only minutes later, officers located Robert Brashers walking along the beach, and based on Michelle's description and the circumstances, he was taken into custody. He was ultimately charged with attempted first-degree murder, aggravated battery, and using a firearm during the commission of a crime. And in 1986, he was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. But under Florida's sentencing and parole laws at the time, which allowed for early release based on good behavior, he would serve less than 4 years. On May 4th, 1989, he was released from prison, and within just a matter of a few years, police in another state would begin collecting DNA evidence from a series of violent crimes, evidence that, at the time, had no name attached to it. After his release from prison in 1989, he didn't settle down in one place. Instead, he moved a lot, bouncing between several states, including South Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. In hindsight, the constant moving made it very difficult for law enforcement to track him. In February of 1992, Brashers was arrested in Cobb County, Georgia, on charges that included grand theft auto and unlawful possession of a weapon. During searches of both his vehicle and his apartment, police uncovered a collection of strange items: a police scanner, a police-style jacket, lock-picking tools, and a fake Tennessee driver's license. Facing the possibility of another lengthy prison sentence, Brashers agreed to a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to the most serious charge, allowing the remaining counts to be dropped, and as a result of this deal, he was sentenced to only 5 years in prison, which he served in full before being released in February of 1997. Once again, he was on the move, spending time in Tennessee, Arkansas, and Missouri over the next couple of years. Then, in April of 1998, he found himself in handcuffs once again, this time in Paragould, Arkansas. Police had caught him attempting to break into a woman's home, but this wasn't just any woman. He had previously done work for her, so he knew her property very well. Another chilling detail: investigators later determined that he had cut the home's phone line and was armed at the time of the attempted break-in. When he was taken into custody, officers seized additional tools, including locksmithing equipment and a video camera. But despite the seriousness of the incident, He was later released after bail was posted. As with so many other criminals, life finally caught up to Robert Brashers. In January of 1999, police in Kennett, Missouri, located a stolen vehicle in the parking lot of a Super 8 motel. And when officers checked with hotel staff, they learned that Brashers and his family had arrived in that vehicle just days earlier. So the police went to the room and forcefully made their way inside. That's where they saw Brashers hiding under a bed with a loaded gun. At first, they tried talking him off the ledge. They didn't want him to do anything stupid to himself or them. They just wanted to take him into custody in peace. But that's not how it went. Brashers repeatedly told officers he would end his life if he went back to prison, so things quickly escalated. Within minutes, the entire motel was surrounded by law enforcement as Brashers held his wife, daughter, and 2 stepdaughters hostage inside the room. Eventually, he would release his family, but he stayed inside. Then, he shot himself. He was transported to the hospital and remained alive for several days before dying from his injuries on January 19th. His death was later ruled a suicide by a single gunshot wound. He was 40 years old. Instead of facing the possibility of going back to prison, he decided to take his own life. At the time, police had no idea just how many victims he was leaving behind. Following his suicide, not many people heard or thought of the name Robert Brashers. Of course, his previous victims still remembered his name, but the rest of the country had no idea who he was. And even more devastating, no one in Austin, Texas in 1991 knew his name either. It's a crime covered in almost every other true crime podcast, the 1991 yogurt shop murders. On the night of December 6, 1991, 4 teenage girls were killed inside an I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. They were 13-year-old Amy Ayers, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, and Jennifer's 15-year-old sister, Sarah. Jennifer and Eliza were working at the shop that night, and Amy and Sarah were there waiting to get a ride home when the store closed at around 11 p.m. About an hour before closing, a man was allowed to use the public restroom located in the back of the shop. Investigators later believed he may have remained inside and possibly jammed a rear door open. Also strange, a couple who left just before closing time reported seeing 2 men seated at a table acting suspiciously. Shortly after midnight, a patrol officer noticed smoke coming from the building, and that's when fire crews responded and discovered the bodies of the 4 girls inside the shop. Each of the victims had been shot in the head, and if that's not horrible enough, investigators determined that at least one of the girls had been sexually assaulted. When it came to the forensic evidence, ballistics showed that 2 different firearms were used. And when it came to the killer's exit out of the yogurt shop, the scene suggested they used the rear door, which was found unlocked. In the blink of an eye, the lives of 4 innocent young girls were all taken. For the next 34 years, no one knew who was responsible for the murders. And during that time, there were false confessions, arrests, convictions, but there was always doubt about who the real perpetrator of the Austin yogurt shop murders was. Insert new DNA testing. This episode of Forensic Tales is brought to you by Lola Blankets. I'll admit it, I'm a total blanket person. After my toddler is in bed, my wind-down routine always looks the same. A true crime doc on, tea in hand, and me wrapped in my Lola blanket. I have the large in cosmic gray, and from the second I opened it, I was obsessed. It's ultra soft, luxurious, and instantly made my space feel cozy. Honestly, I don't even touch my old blankets anymore. Lola is the world's #1 blanket for a reason. Crafted with luxury vegan faux fur and their signature 4-way stretch, it's machine washable, durable, and somehow just gets better after every wash. For a limited time, my listeners are getting a huge 35% off their entire order at lolablankets.com by using code TAILS at checkout. Just head to lolablankets.com and use code TAILS for 35% off. After your purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please support my show and tell them that I sent you. Wrap yourself in luxury with Lola Blankets. It's a new year and time to get back to feeling like yourself. If losing weight is one of your 2026 goals and you're ready to make progress you can count on, then Weight Loss by Hers might be the right fit for you. Through Hers, you're connected with a medical provider who determines if treatment is right for you. If prescribed, your treatment plan is personalized to support you in reaching your goals. Plus, you can access a range of treatment options like oral medication kits or GLP-1 injectables. They even offer the convenience of completely online care with licensed providers on the other side who learn your story and create a personalized plan to deliver healthy progress you can maintain. These are results you can count on. Feel like your best self again. Visit forhers.com/tails to get a personalized, affordable plan that gets you. That's forhers.com/tails, forhers.com/tails. Weight loss by Hers is not available everywhere. Compounded drug products are not approved or evaluated for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for full details, important safety information, and restrictions. Actual price depends on product and plan purchased. By 2018, the name Robert Brashers started popping up in connection to several unsolved crimes, and all of that had to do with DNA testing. That year, investigators turned to forensic genetic genealogy in an effort to identify an unknown suspect tied to several cold cases involving sexual assault and homicide. Working alongside law enforcement was genealogist Cece Moore of Parabon Nanolabs. Her role was to analyze crime scene DNA using public genealogy databases, a technique that was still relatively new at the time. Today, it's helped to solve probably hundreds, if not thousands, of cold cases. We've covered so many of them on this show alone. And through that process, Brasher's name popped up. But of course, one of the problems was he had been dead for nearly 20 years by this point. To confirm what the genetic genealogy testing suggested, prosecutors in Missouri sought court approval to exhume Brasher's remains. The request was granted, and in September of 2018, his casket was exhumed from a cemetery in Paragould, Arkansas. Once that happened, DNA was extracted directly from his remains and compared to evidence preserved from multiple unsolved cases, and the results were undeniable. His DNA was a perfect match to the killer of 28-year-old Genevieve, known as Jenny Zetricki, who was murdered in Greenville, South Carolina on April 5, 1990. She had been found in her apartment where she had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled with pantyhose. Police determined that after killing her, the perp dragged her body into the bathroom and submerged it in the bathtub. A message was also written on the bathroom mirror, a detail that had haunted the investigation for years. At the time of her murder, investigators were able to later confirm that Robert Brashers was living in Greenville, just a short distance from Jenny's apartment. DNA from the crime scene had been preserved and was eventually uploaded into CODIS in the mid-1990s, but no match was ever found. It would sit there, unidentified, for more than 2 decades. Until now. And Jenny's case wouldn't be the only one. On March 28, 1998, 38-year-old Sherry Scherer and her 12-year-old daughter Megan were found murdered inside their home. Both had been tied up, and that might not even be the worst part. Forensic evidence later confirmed that Megan had been sexually assaulted before she and her mother were killed. At the time, the police had little to go on, but years later, DNA testing conclusively linked Robert Brashers to both murders. But the timeline of this crime revealed something else. Just 2 hours after the murders in Portageville, Brashers broke into another home, this time in Dyersburg, Tennessee. There, he attempted to sexually assault a 25-year-old woman, but she wasn't willing to go down without a fight. She fought back hard, and that strategy seemed to work, because the fight scared off the attacker and he ran away. But when the crime was reported to the police, there wasn't much they could do. They didn't find any usable biological evidence at the scene. But they did have ballistic evidence. That evidence would later reveal that the same gun used in the Scherer murders had been used during the Dyersburg break-in. DNA would also link Brashers to a separate sexual assault committed the year before. On March 11, 1997, a 14-year-old girl was raped inside a home in Memphis, Tennessee. At the time of the attack, multiple people were inside the home. According to investigators, Brashers knocked on the door and then forced his way inside carrying a gun. Then once inside, he restrained everyone inside and assaulted the victim. And just like with the other cases, the forensic evidence preserved from that scene would eventually confirm his involvement years later. And even after his death, the list of crimes connected to Robert Brashers continues to grow. In October of 2025, investigators announced that Brashers had been identified as the perpetrator of a previously unsolved murder in Kentucky, a case involving the rape and fatal shooting of a woman. But as of today, authorities have not released additional details, citing the ongoing nature of the investigation. That now brings us full circle, back to the Austin yogurt shop murders, the case that put Robert Brashers' name in the news once again. In September of 2025, the Austin Police Department announced a major development in the case. Using the same kind of DNA used in the other cases we've talked about, police identified Brasher as the man responsible for the yogurt shop murders. A partial Y-STR DNA profile had been developed years earlier from evidence collected during the original investigation. But at the time, that profile didn't match any of the men previously accused in the case. When Brasher's DNA was recovered in 2018 and later entered into comparison testing, investigators found that his Y-STR profile was consistent with the male DNA recovered from the crime scene, enough to identify him as a suspect and pursue additional forensic testing. That DNA evidence wasn't the only link. Investigators also re-examined ballistic evidence from the scene, including a bullet casing recovered from a drain inside the yogurt shop. And when it was tested, the results showed that the casing was consistent with markings produced by the same firearm Brashers used in 1999, when he died by suicide following a standoff with police in Missouri. So taken together, the DNA evidence and the ballistic findings, we now know that Robert Brashers was responsible for the murders. But because he's been dead for years, he'll never be charged or brought to court. But not all is lost with this discovery. Before we knew that Brashers was behind the yogurt shop murders, other men were accused of committing it. And it's just as important to identify suspects as it is to exonerate the innocent ones. In December of 2025, the Travis County District Attorney's Office filed a motion to formally exonerate 4 men who had previously been accused and convicted in connection with the yogurt shop murders. For a long time, a lot of people thought the yogurt shop murders were committed by more than one person. That was based on a few things: witness statements from that night, the presence of multiple weapons, and just the sheer violence of the crime. Everyone thought it had to be the work of multiple people. I don't think people wanted to believe that just one man could be responsible for such violence. But based on what we now know about the forensic evidence, it looks like that's the case. This horrible, horrible crime was committed by one single individual, Robert Brashers. At this point, there isn't any confirmed forensic evidence placing any additional individuals inside the shop that night. That doesn't necessarily mean Robert Brashers acted alone, but it does mean that scientifically, he is the only person whose DNA has been conclusively linked to the crime. Most people will only know Robert Brashers' name because of the yogurt shop murders, but focusing on that single case misses the bigger picture. Through advances in forensic science, especially DNA analysis and investigative genetic genealogy, investigators were able to uncover a much larger pattern of violence. At least 8 murders have now been attributed to Brashers, along with 1 known attempted murder and multiple sexual assaults spanning several states and nearly a decade. Brashers lived an ordinary life in between these crimes. He moved a lot, formed relationships, and avoided suspicion. For years, his victims' cases remained disconnected until forensic technology finally gave investigators the ability to see what had been there all along. This case is a reminder that forensic science doesn't just solve individual crimes, it can reveal patterns, it can give names back to victims, and it can expose offenders who for decades lived under our noses. For some families, that knowledge came too late for justice in a courtroom, but it did bring truth. And in cases like these, truth matters. And it's worth remembering that behind every forensic breakthrough is a victim who is waiting to be seen.
Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to help create compelling new cases, fund research, and assist with production and editing costs, you can support the show with a small monthly contribution. In return, you'll be one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com.
If you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a positive review. Make sure you're subscribed to the show so you don't miss an episode.
Thank you for listening, and see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.